Welcome back. Today's book review is Sarah Dessen's Along for the Ride. I hadn't planned on doing any Sarah Dessen books, largely because there are so many. And we know me. I am going to read each book and review each book, and that's just a lot. It's a lot for me to read, it's a lot for me to record, and it's a lot for me to edit. Especially because then I would post them one after another, just so that I can get through the sheer volume of books that I'm reading. I want to try to get newer books out sooner rather than reading a hot book today only to post it in a year when it's no longer hot. But then again, this is my channel. I'm going to do what I want when I want it, and I figured Sarah Dessen has the new movie coming out, so I was like, I'll read along for the ride, remind myself what it's about. And since it's a summer book, I was like, I can rearrange some things in my summer. So here we go, along for the ride. Tomorrow might be another book. I don't know. We'll find out. I first got into Sarah Dessen because of her book Lock and Key. I'm an army brat, so I'm all about reading new kid stories. And that is essentially what Lock and Key is about. It wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but it wasn't bad. But from there, I just formed a Sarah Dessen addiction. And I am pleased to report that I didn't really have any issues with Along for the Ride. I want to say it's like 10-ish years old at this point. Ooh, I just noticed. So, okay, I get through most of my books by audiobook. I do not know when I bought this book. I actually picked up Lock and Key from Goodwill. So, I actually pick up a lot of my books from Goodwill. This is obviously not a Goodwill book. And I have never opened it in my life, which means that I never noticed that there is a map of the town of Colby. Which is one thing that I love so much about Sarah Dessen's writing. Actually, first, let me get to the point, which is this book was published in 2012. So, at this point, it is 10 years old. I don't know how old it'll be when you get to my review, but one thing that I think continued to draw me into her books is the attachment to Colby, how that is the thread that ties her books together. No matter how thin it might be, we always have some attachment to this little beach town. And Along for the Ride, honestly guys, I don't remember the last time I read any books by Sarah Dessen. Been long enough that I can't remember how many of them actually take place in Colby, but this one does. Let's get to the book. The main character is a teenager named Auden. Her parents are divorced, and her dad has remarried to someone she considers a bimbo, yet she decides to spend the summer with them in the town of Colby. Her dad, about 10 years prior, had published a book, and it had been wildly successful, and he hasn't been able to publish anything since. Her mom has been published as well, but only educationally. There are a lot of issues with them because they're both egomaniacs, and eventually it just came to a head where they were like, we can't be together. And so during this point in time, Auden said, hey, you know what? They fight when I go to bed, so if I don't go to bed, then they won't fight. Obviously didn't solve the problem, but it did create insomnia within her. So we enter into this summer after senior year where she is very bookish. Of the two children, she is the one who is the smart one. Her brother, Hollis, is kind of the layabout. He gets to do what he wants, and he's been off traveling Europe for 2 years, which I'm just going to stop right here and say how. He's leeching off of his parents' money. And okay, so his dad had been mildly successful 10 years prior, but now he's a college professor. He has a new wife and a new child, and their mother, while okay, yes, successful in her own right, is also a college professor. So I'm like, where is this money coming from? Because he's not making any. I really don't understand the whole money thing, but the point is, he has been off doing his own thing, has left Auden to be the one that their parents are proud of, the one that they can rely on, and this just means that she's really serious. She's only attended the best schools that are going to get her to the best colleges, so her focus is not on being a teenager. It's basically being a pre-adult. I think one of my favorite aspects of this novel this time around were the depictions of Auden's parents, because our dad is entirely misogynistic. It is incredible that nobody has raised a stink, as far as I know, about his views and his abuse of his family members. He gets Heidi pregnant. I don't remember if they'd been married yet, but in any case, their opposites attract, which again makes me wonder, why did she fall in love with him? What was it about him that drew her in? Because he's incredibly selfish. She has this baby, and he is like, oh, I can't help you because you know I need 9 hours of sleep, and then as soon as I wake up, you know that this summer is dedicated to finishing my next book, so, you know, you're on your own and taking care of the baby. And oh, when Auden gets there and she's like, aren't you gonna help Heidi? He's like, oh, well, Heidi wants to do it all by herself. Anytime that something difficult comes up, like maybe they need help taking care of the baby, and so Heidi's like, absolutely not. Auden is not here to be our babysitter. And the dad's like, yeah, well, I mean, like, ... which means that somebody else has to fill in the blank to basically give him what he wants. So I think it's interesting that he never takes accountability in this entire novel. A little bit of a spoiler here. Things eventually come to a head, and Heidi, who I enjoy her evolution too, because when we meet her, Auden, because of her mother's influence, thinks that Heidi, because of her proclivity for pink and femininity, they think that she's a bimbo, when in fact she's incredibly smart and she runs a very successful business. We see that she can kind of have her cake and eat it too. She doesn't have to be super serious like Auden and cynical like Auden's mother. She can enjoy life while also being intelligent. But yes, at some point she's like, you know what, Robert? I've had enough. You are really selfish. Your whole life is about you. You will not do a single thing about this child. And then we've also overheard early on in the novel that the only reason Auden is in Colby is because Heidi invited her. So it wasn't that it was her dad's idea for her to come, but it was Heidi saying, you need to spend time with your child. So we learned that he doesn't even want to spend time with Auden. Like, he has no interest in his children whatsoever. But yes, so they separate. And there comes a point when Auden says, I need to get rid of these forces in my life. So I'm going to stop answering my mom's phone calls. I'm going to stop answering my dad's phone calls, and they're just going to have to figure it out and deal with it. We do at some point get him coming to something of a realization as to he wants to be part of his family. But I do wish, as much as I liked hating him and be like, oh my gosh, people, can you not see what kind of a person he is? I did wish for a bit more growth from him, for someone to sit down, because maybe Heidi did it behind closed doors, but I really wanted someone to sit him down and be like, look, you're an overgrown child in a man's body. You need to suck it up and take care of your own business. The world does not revolve around you. Anyways, as for her mother, I mean, it's a miracle these two ever got married. And then on that note, as much as I liked them, they were almost caricatures. And I had wished that they weren't so stereotypical, even though Auden's mother does evolve more than her father. I wished that Dessen had made them more well-rounded rather than just really black and white. Like, we have to impress upon the reader where Auden got her personality and her characteristics from, but they're not actually real people because they're only like this. The mother is extremely feminist, which is when my problem with her characterization comes in, because as I said, she does have some evolution towards the end where we see her as a mother figure, where certain things that Auden had attributed elsewhere actually came from her mother, and we do see how her mother softens, how her mother sees the change in Auden and sort of self-reflects. But then again, some of what we get for that evolution is epilogue, like Auden giving us a recap of how things have changed since the summer ended. But her mother is this feminist, and we learn that she's always holding these like uppity frou-frou gatherings for like the high-minded folk in her graduate English courses, and they're always discussing really highfalutin novels, and you would not find me there. I love talking about books, but I read for fun. Existentialism, not my thing. I like Jane Austen, but you're not going to have me sitting down talking about metaphors and the meaning of life and why Austen did what she did. Like, to an extent, yes, but yes, these little dinner parties, these wine whatevers, like, anyways, it just, yes, goes to show what kind of a person she is. And then we learn that she's sleeping with one of those graduate students. Auden realizes that this guy had slept over, but she doesn't think it's an ongoing thing until her mother visits her in Colby. She goes to her mother's hotel, sees him out by the pool, and then she sees them leaving town together. And this is something I didn't quite understand, because the whole May-December romance is not my thing. But we learn in that kind of epilogue-y chapter how they're working on the relationship. Like, she had cut it off because he wanted to be serious, and that's not what she did. But because of her growth, she was like, yes, let me date a 22-year-old when I'm, I don't know, mid-40s maybe? Anyways, Auden, she's in Colby. Her first night there, she goes to get dinner. On her way there, on her way back, whatever, she encounters some locals, and one of the guys says really flattering things to her and tells her, hey, come to this party on the beach. She can't sleep, so she finds herself there. And this is something I think, if anything, I did not understand about Auden. Not a typical teenager. Not interested in the typical teenager things. I mean, even prom, where he stood her up, she was kind of like, whatever. That guy was the closest thing she had to a romantic interest. But you get the sense that sexual attraction is not forefront on her mind. She winds up at this party, re-encounters the guy. They go to the dunes and do something. I don't think it was a home run, but they fooled around to some capacity. For me, I do not understand why she would have done that, because she hadn't been drinking. Yeah, like, there was some sort of attraction towards this guy. His name is Jake. But I did not see what would have led her to do that. In the end, it was an event that needed to happen, because it was a catalyst for the rest of the novel. But I don't buy the rationale behind it, the reasoning behind it. Because as I said, she wasn't drunk. She wasn't someone who was necessarily curious in that capacity. So why she would let a stranger lead her into the dunes to do whatever they did, it was out of character. She does that with Jake. And then the next day, she goes to Heidi's clothing store. She meets one of the girls that works there named Maggie. Maggie is her age. There's also two other girls, Leah and Esther, who are also her age. They are Maggie's best friends. They also work at Clementine's. So yeah, she's just chatting with Maggie, kind of getting along and whatnot. Enter Esther and Leah. So Auden has gone to do something else, to look at bathing suits. I don't know, but she's out of sight when these other two come into the store. They break the news that Jake had hooked up with someone. And she's like, who in the world did he hook up with? Because turns out they had dated for a number of years and semi-recently had broken up, but she is still obsessed with him. When you know it, it was Auden, and so this sort of sets a tone for how those relationships are going to go. But then Auden gets involved with the business because Heidi is at home with the baby. Heidi needs someone to help her with the books. And because one of Auden's summer jobs was working for an accountant, she is qualified to do Heidi's books. Actually, this is something that I thought was really interesting because now that I have worked in retail, I'm like, I don't think some of these activities would actually have happened in real life, which means when you work in retail, somebody always has to be on the floor. Because if they're not, you have a higher chance for theft, right? So how is it that all these girls consistently leave Clementine's floor unattended to come talk to Auden about something because Auden's back in the office doing the books? I just think it's unrealistic. Like, it doesn't necessarily bother me because it's kind of part of the book, and I don't know, maybe a small business runs differently. But even at my store, not only does one person have to be on the floor at all times, but there's not just one person at the store. Like, there's always got to be two people. It's about accountability, you know what I'm saying? And safety in numbers. So I did think it funny looking at it from my new perspective, because I'm sure when I first read this book, it never occurred to me that these girls were leaving the floor unattended. Granted, Colby is one of the small towns where I'm sure theft never happens, but I was like, every single time, I was counting. I was like, every single time the girls left the floor unattended, I was like, okay, I see this, I do. Anyways, Auden, and this just goes along with her whole romp in the dunes not making sense. She's really awkward socially. She does not have friends. Not only has she started off on a bad foot with these girls, but now she's working with them, seeing them consistently. It's forcing them together. And there are moments where she's like, I think the hand of friendship or the olive branch is being extended, but I don't know what to do about it. Obviously, they do befriend each other eventually, if only because the other girls are unrelenting and Auden is slightly curious. Although, I do have to say, for somebody who has really awkward social graces, I did think some of her comments and conversations felt awfully natural. She all of a sudden has a sense of humor, that she knows how to joke and how to connect and how to say things that are relevant to the conversation. I thought that could have taken a little bit more development as well. Anyways, not a big deal, but every now and again, I was like, wow, Auden sure knows how to fit into the scene, doesn't she? We have the three girls, we have their burgeoning friendship, but then we have the boys. We have Jake, his brother Eli, a guy named Adam who's had a crush on Maggie forever, and then like, I think 2 other ancillary characters. And they are all involved with this bike shop. And we have this running subplot about naming the bike shop, because at one point it had a name, and then the sign got blown down, and then they all just started calling it the bike shop. And now for some reason it's up to them to rename it. Where the owner is during all of this, I have no idea. We do meet the owner at some point, but still, like, why he apparently leaves the entire running of his shop up to teenage boys, I don't know. Anyways, Eli is then Auden's love interest. But what we learn in his subplot is that his best friend Abe had died a year prior. Eli had been at the wheel. These guys had been like professional BMXers. I think they're BMX. They ride bikes professionally, and they'd come home, or they were on their way home from a race when the accident happened. It wasn't Eli's fault, but obviously he feels an extreme amount of guilt. He quits writing. He essentially pulls away from his friendships. He and Auden connect because they just run into each other randomly. And because she knows nothing about his past, he feels more comfortable with her. He feels like she's not going to give him that look of pity. So they start hanging out. I guess you could call it dating. At some point they kiss, and from there it's some kind of official, but nobody knows. And then also during this time period, he starts writing, and that's actually one of the first things she caught him doing was riding a bike. At some point it's brought up amongst the girls, and the girls are like, he doesn't ride anymore. And Auden's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he does. Anyways, they're bonding as he is teaching her how to be a teenager, do all the things that she missed because she was so focused on school. At the same time, she is now feeling the pressure from her mother to not change. This is then throwing a wrench into her relationship with Eli because she's like, am I focusing on the wrong things? There's also an encounter with an ex-girlfriend. That is cleared up, only for then Auden to see them together and assume that they're getting back together. And this is something I did like, because I kind of like that trope of misunderstanding. But I like the way that Dessen did not prolong it the way that a lot of writers do, where that is sort of like, not the midpoint necessarily, but it's kind of like everything is going really great until it's not, and then we have that moment of misunderstanding, and then the two are separated until the end of the book. So in this instance, it's only a night. She's off with her friends. She overhears a conversation, and she's like, oh, okay, so it was actually the ex-girlfriend telling him that she actually met somebody new. So it was the exact opposite of what I thought happened. So she gives him a call, and he ends up showing up at their gathering, which surprises all of the friends because they're like, he never comes to this stuff. Anyways, at some point, Maggie starts catching on to the fact that they're hanging out. She more or less lets Auden know this, but she also lets her know that she thinks it's great. That she thinks it's great that there's somebody in his life bringing him back to life. But when Auden starts feeling the pressure to be the smart girl again and to focus on the important things, focus on the important things, this is then what ultimately tears them apart. And it comes by way of her defunct prom date, who has this I do not understand, because Colby is so small. It's a beach town, but still it's super small. Yet, for some reason, there is this prep course. So it's like a future leaders of America. Here's a way to make an impact on your Ivy League education summer course, and he's part of it. Eli catches them together. Auden is feeling that pressure and that guilt too of kind of abandoning her old way of life. But Eli accuses her essentially of being too afraid to live her life, like just falling back on her old ways when something is hard for her. And what is hard for her is being a normal person, being in a relationship with a normal guy, doing normal teenage things, having normal teenage friendships. She falls back into that comfort zone of reading and preparing for school and doing the stuff that she's good at. However, there does come a point where she decides it's time to learn how to ride a bike, because she thought that she knew how to ride a bike, but then she has a conversation with Hollis and she realizes, I guess I don't know how to ride a bike. So then Maggie is teaching her how to ride a bike. But before I move on, Hollis is kind of playboy of the Western world. He's always got these girlfriends, these bimbos, these just really friendly girls who think it's forever and it's never forever, coming by the house and whatevering. And then Auden gets a phone call from him and he's like, I'm home. And I'm home because of a girl. He has met this girl named Laura, and she's the exact opposite of everything he's ever dated, and he is absolutely convinced she is the one. And I wanted to pause here because, again, so if you hadn't caught on, Laura is a mini-me of their mother, except she's into sciences, whereas their mother is into English and literature. I understand dating your mother, dating your father, seeing the qualities of your parents in your significant other. But they are so polar opposite. And from what I can see, what I'm given from Laura, there is no give. I'm not really seeing where the compromise in their relationship is, except that he is doing everything she wants. And for such a free spirit, I don't understand, one, how he was attracted to that. Yes, I get it. He sees his mother in her, but their personalities and their goals are so different. I don't understand where the attraction came in, except it's very much like with their parents, where they're stereotypes. And so this is just a stereotypical relationship of opposites attract, and we really don't need to explain why. They just are, because Hollis needs to have a come to Jesus moment, and he needs to come back home and change his life. This will then have an impact on the way that Auden views the world. He's like, I'm home, I have this new girlfriend, and we're gonna come visit. This is when we see Laura, and this is when we see she's dull. And I continue to question why they're together. He's making all kinds of sacrifices to be the kind of person that she wants, whereas it seems like she's doing nothing to change her ways for him, which in some respects, I get it. If he needs to grow up, by all means, let him grow up. But I would have liked to have seen little things that showed that she wasn't stone cold, that even though she was a really serious person, she did have a softer interior, and we don't get much of that. Now she's seeing the change in him, and he is telling her, like, you never learned to ride a bike. I don't know what memory you're remembering, but the penultimate moment of the book is the beach bash. So every year this town has a beach bash, and honestly, guys, I think two of my biggest influences in writing place comes from Sarah Dessen novels and Gilmore Girls. My locations tend to be an amalgamation of Stars Hollow and Colby. What can I say? I love the idea of a small town. I hate living in one. Colby always has this beach bash, and Heidi usually chairs the committee, but now that she has a baby, things have fallen to the wayside. She hears about Auden's prom mishap, and she's like, that's it. That is the theme. So if you haven't guessed it, Jason asks her again, and he stands her up again, which I liked her reaction to it because she essentially realized she doesn't need his validation. But at the same time, so I know we get more Jason in other novels. We see how he changes, but in this novel, and okay, so he owns up to how crappy he is, but I would have liked to have seen Auden put him in his place. We get all of these male characters who basically get to do what they want without repercussions. So I would have liked for her to be like, you know what? I get it, and honestly, it's fine. But you need to get your priorities in order. Like, this was a really crappy thing for you to do twice. Beach bash is coming up. She gathers the nerve to ask Eli, and he shuts her down. And so she's incredibly depressed, and she's like, I'm not going to the beach bash. I really just don't feel like it. Heidi, you go. I will babysit Thisbe, which I should have gone back and reread this part. Heidi wanted to name her Caroline Isabel, or Isabel Caroline. Robert, the dad, was like, oh no, we need to give her a name of meaning, so let's name her Thisbe. Heidi put her foot down enough to say, well, her middle name will be Caroline. We get a moment in the book where she fesses up to the fact that she hates that name. And so when nobody's around, she'll call Thisbe Caroline. And so then Auden decides to call her Isby because it's a combination of two names, and I guess it's a combination of Isabel and Thisbe, which is what I should have gone back and double checked. Still, I don't remember thinking this is like the stupidest name ever. But when I was listening to it this time, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, Isby is such a dumb nickname. Little things, people, little things. We all get bothered by something. And this time around, I was like, Isby? That's a combination of what two names? And then just Isby? Let's just leave it at Thisbe, okay? Auden decides not to go to the beach bash, only for her mother to show up. Then she has to go to the beach bash. Well, she, one, was going to deliver Heidi's forgotten phone, but then she decides, you know what? Why not? Like, why should I not go? So here is where we see the evolution of her mother as her mother stays to watch this baby. And we realize that she has a soul after all because she's nice to kids. We also get Auden answering Heidi's phone and having a bit of a conversation with her dad, which is kind of the one instance in which someone says, dude, you've got to man up and do something for yourself. He's like, I want to come home and this and that and the other. And she's like, well, prove it. My mom proved to me that she's changing because she came to me when she couldn't get a hold of me for, I don't know, a couple weeks. She decided, hey, I'm going to go check in on my kid. But we are consistently coming to you. So if this is something you truly want, you need to do something about it. She's pedaling to the beach bash. She stumbles across Eli driving his truck to the beach bash. She has this magnificent moment where she jumps the curb and has, soars through the air. And I mean, it's cool, but for me it was slightly unbelievable because if she's still scared about staying upright on a bike, I had a hard time believing that she wouldn't wipe out as soon as her tires hit that curb. In any case, they have a heart-to-heart where he reveals that he told her no because he had a bike competition. He just wanted to close the chapter on that book, and this was his final competition. Blah, blah, blah. They kiss and make up, and there we go. We learn that she and Maggie are rooming together, and I liked Maggie. I did think, okay, overall the narration of the audiobook was good, but I did think the narrator made Maggie sound like more of an airhead. It's problematic for me only because she's supposed to be really, really smart, like deceptively smart. So it's kind of like, oh, well, this girl can be completely girly and really foolish and super opposite of Auden, but she's still on Auden's level. Based purely on the narration. The cold hard facts, I don't mind. I'm completely okay with the fact that she's able to balance those two aspects of her life. But the way that she was narrated, another stereotype, but that's not anything about the writing. That's more about the narration. I don't remember upon my first read if I put together that they were going to end up as roommates, but they do. It's the end of the book. Auden has come full circle. She's had her full growth period. She's well on her way to be a well-rounded member of society. Along for the ride, I quite enjoyed. I was thankful because it is YA. It is kind of fluffy. Definitely a beach read, but Dessen is really good at teaching life lessons. Her books are extremely formulaic though. So if you don't like formulas, I wouldn't recommend reading every single one of her books one after another because it will get old. Colby as a setting is a great character. Her characters are always pretty fleshed out. There are the one-offs that are kind of stereotypical. I do like how they balance each other out, how they have flaws, but they're still really relatable. So yeah, Sarah Dessen, Along for the Ride. Let me know what your favorite Sarah Dessen book is. Let me know what your favorite beach read or your favorite summer reads are so I can look into them and put them out there. Hope you enjoyed the review. See you soon.